Good morning. I'm Professor Dhaval Thakkar. I'm Professor of AI and Internet of Things at the University of Hull, and I'm one of the organizers of the workshop. And my job here right now is I'm delighted to introduce Sandeep Chatterjee, who is our keynote speaker. Sandeep is a supply chain and sustainability leader with IBM. Before IBM, he's held many other leadership roles with Deloitte, KPMG, Tata Motors, Infosys, and Oracle Consulting. I was looking at his long list of awards, which I would not be able to mention all of them, but I'll mention two among those numerous awards. He's won Global Power Leader and Global Inspirational Leader as well. He is easily among the top 100 supply chain professionals in India, so we are very, very lucky to have him with us here to deliver this keynote. He's going to talk about AI and sustainability at Crossroads, so it's very, very relevant to AI and net zero debate. So over to you, Sandeep. I'm looking forward to your talk. Thank you.
So, good morning and thank you for having me. I think it's a privilege and honor for me to be here. And Dr. Satya mentioned in the last slide about whether we need AI. I think he made it a little easy for me. I can pick up from there because today we're going to talk about sustainability and AI, the two buzzwords everybody wants to be in this space. But we really have to look at it where we are heading towards. While the earth is really in a very bad state in a sense that to support one earth, we need 1.8 earths. That means there's an overconsumption. While companies have made money, but the thing is, do we need to grow that fast? Because I'm not worried about the resource depletion. I'm more worried about the rate of resource depletion. Because at this rate, another 30, 40, 50 years, I think there may be a day when we will used to have a race called human beings. Because the earth doesn't need us, we need the earth. And we are at a tipping point almost close to 1.5 degree because we are at 1.1. Why this 1.5? Because earth can regenerate itself. But once we cross this 1.5, the regeneration may not be enough. The damage would have been done. So that's why everybody is really worried about that. The fact is, unless it hits my home, people are not taking it seriously. There is still mindless consumption. In certain countries, the kind of clothes which have been bought, that is enough for 6 generations. While fast fashion, everybody talks about it, people have made a lot of money around it, but that's where we stand. Similarly, if you look at it, another very dark statistics, the top 1% of the world's richest people own about 50% of the world's wealth. So that puts a lot of pressure on society. We are already grappling with unemployment. We are grappling with wars. As I speak, there are 68 conflict zones in the world today. We only hear a few. I think this is where we are not in the best of times. But having said that, I always end up in a positive note saying that if we really take these things very seriously, I think we can do a lot. And I will also touch upon AI again, how AI can actually help, because historically, if you look at it, AI consumes a lot of computer resources. OpenAI spent about $400 million just to train their models. They consume a lot of computer resources. The kind of energy which is going out of the data, consumed by data centers, are going up. So a lot of people feel that is anti-sustainability. But that's why you will hear a lot of things around green IT, because while AI, Gen AI, blockchain, they look fantastic, but it's also important that the kind of computer resources which they consume, that is also at manageable level. So again, I will just do a structured presentation. I will talk about the sustainability. I spoke very briefly about it. Then I will talk about the impact of AI, Gen AI, because this is something which is going to touch our lives. Then I will talk about the scary part, because this is where AI and sustainability, they are at crossroads. And then we need to look at it. While we all understand that Gen AI is using a lot of computer resources, how we can look at it. And then I will look at some sample use cases where it has the potential to make a difference. Now, if you look at it, this is the 17 SDG goals given by the UN. So, what we have done is we have bucketed it under four: people, planet, profit, and purpose. While people, we understand about the social thing, we understand the planet. The other angle which is important is the profit angle, because a lot of people think that no, we should be sustainable. That's good, but no CEO will chase sustainability at the expense of profit. We want companies to be profitable. Otherwise, it's a very frustrating thing for a CEO that he is losing money. And today, as the metric is only GDP, so unless the metrics change, what I'm going to talk about really doesn't make sense. So as a world, as a community, we also need to look at growth, but responsible growth. Because while growing 10x is some CEO's target, but do we need to really grow 10x? These are the questions which we need to ask at this point of time. Now, Gen AI everywhere, people are talking about it. It will revolutionize the world. While yes, a lot of companies are spending a lot of money. And today, again, a very famous joke is going around that if you have a .ai in your company's name, it's easy to get a funding. So that's the kind of thing. While all this looks fantastic, and most of the CEOs are looking at this as a great potential for revenue. In fact, the few companies, if you look at the last 2 quarters, GenAI has been the most revenue generating for them. But having said that, where is this the opportunity? Of course, it makes my life easy. For example, we talk about IT ops, right? I don't want to manage a data center. Let GenAI monitor it. If my data center is not consuming resource, for example, 70% of the time, my data center doesn't consume energy, but it is still remaining idle. So what we can do is we have created a solution that when it is not consumed idle, it is shut down automatically, so that we don't consume, because data centers are notorious for energy consumption. Second, we are using recycled water to cool down these data centers. Third aspect, the kind of materials which we use. For example, we hear a lot about lithium being hazardous. While lead, we know that lead batteries are very hazardous, but the advantage with lead is 99% of the time we can recycle it. Lithium, not so much. So we are looking at how we can recycle, how we can use some of these materials so that we use, as I said, it's the rate of resource depletion which is of concern for me. Similarly, if you look at it, cybersecurity everywhere, because the dark side is, while we are using Gen AI for good things, but as I say, there are always smarter people, and they are using it for all the wrong reasons. So this is where I think we are seeing a lot of then other things around business automation, customer care, we all understand it's making. For example, I want to plan a trip to say Masai Mara in Kenya. So if I have to go through each of these websites, maybe it will take 2 days. I tell Gen AI, plan an itinerary for me. It will do it in maybe seconds or maybe minutes. But there's a joy in actually going through all these websites, but I will leave aside this debate. But what I'm trying to do is it's all about efficiency and speed, where Gen AI is going to make a lot of impact. Because the biggest thing which has happened today is the customer tolerance time has reduced drastically. Somebody wants a 10-minute grocery. I don't know who needs a grocery in 10 minutes, but that's how the customer mindset is. But if I have to look at what kind of inventory I want to look at, because you still need to have buffer inventory, where I stock, how much I stock, and the kind of data which we are generating, human brain cannot process it in that few seconds. I still believe human brain is still the best, but the kind of decisions which we have to make in split seconds based on data, that is where Gen AI is going to come out very handy for us. So of course, there's a huge opportunity. People are looking at some of the retail chains, some of the FMCG, some of the big chains are looking at, you have a persona. The moment you log in, you will see your picture. It will show you what are the recommendations. So this is where Gen AI is making a lot of headway. But the question still arises, do we need to grow so fast? Now let me look at the scary part. I spoke very briefly about it. There's a very high energy consumption because all these models don't come cheap. The data centers are consuming lots of energy. There is e-waste generation, typically coming to millions, because what do we do with the Professor Nishikant Mishra spoke about how we can increase the longevity of laptops. But the way it is designed that any electronic goods will not work after 3 years, because that's where they wanted to increase the consumption. Nothing wrong about it, but the thing is, where do we go from here? For example, you can have a fantastic video saying that I have a sustainable footprint, but the fact that you're upgrading your phone every year, that is not sustainable. And of course, when I look at lithium, you are mining, you have to mine that, you have to move the material. All this leads to a very high footprint. While, as I said, Gen AI looks fantastic on paper, but you also have to look at it, take a pause that are we doing good for the planet? So some of the companies, what they have done is, if you look at any piece of code, every line of code has a carbon footprint, because people are trying to optimize, people are trying to not reinvent the wheels. Today, the foundation models are being shared so that we can at least save some of these energies. Now, other considerations, as I said, explainability. Now, it's a very interesting part is if you go to Gen AI, if you give a question, the same question, if you ask after 5 minutes, you may get a different answer. So the fact is, if it doesn't make sense, if it is not logical to the human mind, I think that's where the biggest challenge. That's why while people are going gaga over Gen AI, but if you are not able to explain why it is happening, it becomes a big black box. Ethics is another thing because people are using it for other uses. For example, cybercrime has gone to, I think the biggest risk for any supply chain professionals is cyber risk. And Gen AI is actually being used so much that. So again, what is right for me, what is right for business, I think we cannot really dictate people around that, but this is very important that as responsible business, we also look at these ethical considerations. The third is, of course, bias. Of course, there's a lot of data which said that it will only favor a certain group of people because there is the inherent bias in some of these models. So that's where people get frustrated because, for example, there were certain searches which only fetched people of color. So that's not a very fair way of looking. And finally, you need to trust because while people are still skeptical, because that's where we are looking at. So these are the other considerations which are really, if we don't look at it very objectively, this is going to be a problem. Now, as an organization, I cannot do this alone. The important part is, as a country, I may not be able to do it alone. So there's a lot of initiatives which are happening in Europe and US, even in India, where they're looking at a body that let's put those ground rules. Because if I allow AI to, don't put any guardrails around AI, I think it can do more damage, and that is already proven. So I think these are some of the considerations which are very, very important when we look at these aspects. Now, what are the barriers? Of course, we spoke about trust. Now, there's a lot of things around everything which is on internet is not true, because I was speaking to one professor, and he said that one of the students, he actually used Gen AI to submit an assignment. There's nothing wrong in that. But the problem is he did not look at the sanctity of the assignment. Because as I said, everything on the internet is not correct. There's a lot of junk also available. While Gen AI is not able to make that distinction. So that's why what kind of data you integrate, and particularly with enterprises, they're so very skeptical about their data privacy. They don't want to open it up because, in fact, New York Times actually sued OpenAI because they had used some data which was not correct. Third is, again, second, I said AI governance is a big problem because if you don't govern it well, it will just firewall to something else. Data is complex. As I said, Dr. Satya also mentioned about something with the kind of data we are generating. So what kind of data? Because It's not the data, it's the correct data, because 70% of our times is spent in cleaning data. I wish we had an open AI model which could clean that data, because that is where this is the bigger problem. It's not the data, it's the correct data, it's the right data which is important. High price, some of the Gen AI platforms are free, but if you look at it, they are very limited in features, because they spend a lot of money in training these models. So there has to be a revenue model around that. So while it looks fine, but it doesn't come out cheap. And of course, there is limited skill set. Everybody is trying to get into the bandwagon. So it's good thing and bad thing as well, because we don't want a situation where other domains are neglected. And it's very important that Gen AI is fine, but at least you should be able to understand the domain, because knowing technology, but where to apply, it's the application which is also equally important, which we tend to ignore. And finally, if you look at it, each company is trying to build its own LLM models. So there is not really collaboration which is happening. Hopefully, I hope things will be better, but these are typically barriers what we are seeing in all these aspects. Now, looking to sustainability, now let's come back to sustainability. Now, today, if you look at it, there's a lot of focus on reporting, a lot of frameworks all across the world. And data says that people spend more money on sustainable reporting than on innovation, which is, I think, it's a sad thing. But that's where I think we need to really look at it. Businesses believe that AI will help because it's all about speed. For example, a supplier sends me his ESG report. It's a 300-page report. What do I do with it? Maybe I can use Gen AI to look at what is important, because I'm doing a supplier scoring. I don't have the time to go through all 300 pages. Gen AI can look at what is relevant. It can answer the questions on my behalf and put a score on it. I think this is where it's speed. And similarly, when I have to report sustainable reporting, if I can pick up data, if I have a Gen AI tool which can do it, because if I'm spending so much money just on reporting, I think it's not a good thing. Now, the other debate is Gen AI, we are using it, a lot of computer resources. While if we don't use Gen AI, maybe we will take 50, 60, 70 years for net zero, because every company is getting into these targets. Now, some companies do have a considerations, but not everybody. But what Gen AI can help, it can speed up the process. Maybe I can do it in 10 years, 15 years. So it's a balance which we have to maintain, that it's speed versus the kind of emissions. So if I have to do things in 15 years, I think this is going to really benefit us. And it's all about efficiency, it's all about speed. And while again data says that organizations are serious about it, but I think because of this lack of trust, lack of scalability, lack of bias, high cost, I think people are still looking at things very, very differently. Now, in terms of, I spoke briefly about it, they consume a lot of water, there's a carbon footprint, but if you look at it, people are now getting into a sharing kind of a model. For example, if I run this on a container platform, it can save my energy. So now that we are able to measure all this, we are relooking how we can be more efficient. It's easy to write a piece of code, but have you looked at what is the carbon footprint of the code? That's where I think efficiency, because there's a debate that what are we doing it? We are spending a lot of time trying to measure it. But the fact that we are measuring it, that means it gives us a benchmark that we need to do better than that. So that is the positive side around Gen AI. Now, if you look at it, as I spoke about it, data centers, about 4% of gas emissions, then total energy consumption 3%. So that's where there's a lot of initiatives which has been taken by many companies. We call it as green IT, looking at the data centers, looking at the piece of code, looking at open source model, and if you look at all the big tech companies, they have partnerships, because partnerships only helps them with speed. For example, Microsoft has a Copilot, IBM has a Watson X, but again, Microsoft and IBM also partnered together in some of the Copilot things. So this is, I think, where companies are coming together, because if everybody is trying to reinvent the wheel, I think that is going to be a real problem for everyone. Now, these are some of the use cases where we believe that AI can help. For example, reporting, I said, people spend more money on sustainable reporting where technology, AI can help because laws are getting very stringent. Every day there's a new regulation which is coming up because people are really serious about it. Similarly, in terms of when I'm trying to build a plant, there's a predictive model which is being done that if I do this, Dr. Satya mentioned about green steel, green cement. I think these are people are looking at revenues, and that's a more predictive model how we can. So this is where, as I said, lot of data, speed. We have to do a simulation. We have to do a what if scenario analysis. I think this is where AI can help. Now, the third aspect is investments. So now, a lot of investors, they are looking at ESG as one of the parameters. They have their own checklist. So anything you are doing around green, there's a chance that you will get your funding. So again, with loads of data, they are leveraging Gen AI to look at, and it's also important to track it because while I can say that I'm doing this green thing, am I actually doing green? So I think this is where the tracking can be, again, it's not Gen AI alone, it's a combination of technology around IoT and blockchain, which can help this. Supply chain, again, 60 to 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions are from supply chain. And that's where this field is under a lot of pressure. So when people are looking at transparency, for example, my coffee is bad. Can I trace it back to the farm from where it came? Are there ethical practices around coffee production? So I think all this again is a very huge. We have worked with Food Trust in US where we are trying to trace it back, the kind of wastages which we have done. So we have been able to leverage this technology to reduce wastage in food. Then renewables again, very promising. We are getting into more into solar, wind, but it's very important that what is the optimized, because don't expect that it will be 100% green, because petrol, diesel will be there, because there's a huge political lobby which will not let it go easily. But it's important to have a healthy mix. That's where optimization can be done using this. Product development, again, very critical. I just mentioned about the electronic goods, and there is something called EPR, where as a OEM, you are responsible for how it is disposed of. So product design is going to be the next big thing, because there's a lot of focus on how much it is recyclable, how much of less material I can use. And all these need a lot of simulation. Look at a simple drug discovery. It takes billions of dollars. But leveraging Gen AI, if I can do this, I can have a more sustainable product into my product design. I think this is where a lot of money is there. And this is what I believe is, if I have to look at sustainability, Gen AI, I think product design is something which everybody is looking very carefully. Similarly, in terms of climate risk assessment, well, we are talking about it, there are a lot of predictive models, but only thing is, there's also a behavioral change needs to be. It's important that we look at what are the hotspots today. Because, for example, the state of Odisha, every year they go through some kind of a cyclone. But the fact that now they are able to predict it very accurately, so they are prepared. While we cannot stop the cyclone, but at least the damages is less. So I think this is where Gen AI can actually help us. But having said that, that doesn't give us the license to come to pollute more and more. And finally, in terms of circular economy, again, it's a mindset change. The way I grew up, I always drank water from the tap because we had a filter water plant. But today you have plastic water everywhere. While plastic is not bad because nothing can be cheaper than plastic, but it is the single-use plastic which is a problem. And what do I do with the plastic? As I was saying that you have clothes for 6 generations. They make it to landfills. While we know that plastic was found in the blood of whales, but last year plastic was found in the blood of a pregnant lady. I think this is where you have to look at how we can recycle, how we can look at different material. Now, before I end, let me just put 2 examples of what I have done in my life. So, for example, 1998, I was part of Tata Motors at that time. So, at that time, Mr. Ratan Tata had made a promise that we will have the Indica car at 2.5 lakhs rupees. Now, historically, if you look at all the cars in India, they were above 3 lakhs, and we were under tremendous pressure because if we had to do everything from scratch, you cannot sell a car at 2.5 lakh. So, what we did is we imported the second hand assembly line from Nissan Australia. We refurbished it, and that's how Indica was rolled out. Indica was not a very successful car, but it changed the entire ecosystem. Car became affordable for most people in this country. So that was a game changer, and this is where I think if you look at it, refurbished, a second hand assembly line which was refurbished. The second example which I give is I worked with a cement company for about 2 years. And if you look at it, the raw material for cement is usually limestone. And mining companies are notorious for greenhouse gas emissions. So there were two things. We were polluting the environment. We were consuming more limestone. The resources were depleting very fast. So what we did is we looked at fly ash, which is a waste from a power plant. Now it has no use. You will have to pay money to get it disposed. So we started mixing fly ash with limestone that had better binding properties. Similarly, Tata Steel had some slag, which is a waste of steel that cannot be used anywhere. So we started mixing slag with limestone, and that's how cement, and that has better binding properties. So if you look at the cement companies today, they are consuming definitely less limestone. Of course, pollution is still a concern for cement companies, but they have been hugely profitable. The fact that if you just have to challenge the things can be done. So I think these are two examples from my life where I saw that sustainability can be profitable. And today, as we have loads of data, I think it's all about speed and efficiency, while we all understand that it is leading to emissions. But if we are more responsible in the use of GenAI, if we look at how we can use it for the benefit of mankind, so I think that will be a good thing for us. So again, thank you so much for having me. So, and if there are any questions, if there are any comments, I'm more than happy to answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We'll take questions, please, if there is any. There's lots of hands going up, and I can see Bhupesh at the front. Do we have a microphone that can wander around, please? Thank you so much. You want to just put your hand up at the front, on the front row?
Hi. Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for your. It's a very enlightening. I think that the thoughts. So many things I see. I see explainability. You are bringing you bias, trust, but I don't see there is awareness as one of the factors. Probably I see. So there, because I see there is sustainability divide as well. There is between Western country, Asian country, urban region, rural region. So how do you? What do you see the future of? To how to bridge this gap? Minimize the sustainability gap with awareness, where we are and what step we need to.
I think that's a great question, and I think what happens is somebody who is barely making both his ends meet. It's not fair that I go and tell him that you don't do this, because that is what it is. So while it has to be driven by examples, which I said that 1% of the world's population holds 50% of the wealth. I think this is a huge divide. While awareness is fine, but it's not fair that I go and tell somebody in the rural area that you do this, because that's his livelihood. So I agree, awareness is a challenge. We will have to slowly educate people around that, but we also have to make it that he or she doesn't lose livelihood around that, because otherwise it will be very unfair kind of social unrest we will see. It will do more damage. The people are aware of it, that we are damaging the environment, but I think it has to be driven by examples. I think some of the well-off population has to show the way. Otherwise, things may not happen. I will be very candid about it. It's not fair I go and tell the guy that you stop doing this. Sure.
Okay, thank you. There's a hand right at the back. Can you keep your hand up? There we go.
Thank you. Good morning, sir, and thank you for the insightful talk. I needed to understand, how do you see, as you mentioned, in a collaborative, globalized economy, a particular geography becoming competitive for creating a green AI hub? We've seen in India particular geographies becoming IT hubs. How do you see that evolve in the coming 20 years with CSR responsibilities kicking into gear? Essentially, what I'm trying to ask is, what is stopping you from making an office in, let's say, Manipur or Arunachal Pradesh or some of the more far off remote corners of the country? What are your expectations from a geography to invest into that region and set up your offices there, essentially?
I think again a great question. Let's be very honest about it. Typically, if you look at it, there was a model which was done. If you look at most of the institutes in India, they have been set up in remote areas thinking that it will develop that area, which unfortunately did not happen, unlike US, where the economy grew along with that. Because as a country, again, nothing against anyone, we are still job seekers, not job creators. So while companies are okay to open thing is, but and getting an environmental clearance is also, because if you look at Manipur and all that, these are really pristine places. But if we, the moment we open, make it more commercial, I don't know what kind of damage which we are going to do. So while we are open to that, but I think it's very important that we look at the environment. For example, this city of Nagpur, it has a lot of potential, but it could never take the pressure off Mumbai. I think it is more of the intent. There's nothing which cannot stop us, but I think we need to get together. But I think I like the point that certain areas have not been developed. And typically, if you look at it, the Northeast was always considered a separate thing, but now it is coming back to mainstream. Hopefully, things will start moving.
Could I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, absolutely.
Are there any geographies in India that you see are extremely competitive for the industries moving forward today?
Yes, I think tier 2, tier 3 cities, because there's a lot of potential, because in most of the tier 1 cities, there's a lot of traffic congestion and a lot of productive hours. So we are looking at tier 2, tier 3. But it's all about trust also, because while in other parts of the world, you trust that if people are working from home, people are actually working. But I don't say people are not doing it, but still the companies are a little skeptical that if they don't come to office, are they really working? So if this trust factor is broken, I think tier 2, tier 3 cities will be because that's the future, because the kind of traffic, the kind of city which we are seeing, Bangalore and all that, I think it's very important that we take a look at these tier 2, tier 3 cities.
Okay, further questions, please. Right beside the previous questioner.
I'm Ayushman from Delhi. My question is, what's expected? What's expected from someone who wants to contribute in this field? Like, what tech stack or what values they can focus on?
See, first thing I will say is you have to believe in that. If you don't believe in sustainability, what you will do is you will just put a tick mark, because that is what is happening in terms of ESG reporting. There's a lot of greenwashing. So it's important that if you really believe in that, I think you will do a fantastic job. Giving the example of Europe, I was there last month, and I think that they're really serious about that. For example, in certain geographies, they don't allow an aeroplane. You have to go by train. I think that's a revenue loss for the government, but they're really serious about it. I think that mindset has to come. So I think it's an emerging field. 2022 Indian government rolled the BRSR. SEBI they have to report, top 1,000 listed companies have to report. Unfortunate part, SEBI said scope 1, scope 2 mandatory, scope 3 voluntary. None of the companies reported scope 3, unlike in some countries where scope 3 is mandatory. So things are coming up, things are heating up, but there's a lot which you can do. But important is you have to believe in that. If you really still believe that it is not for me, it just becomes I will be very honest, it just becomes a tick mark.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions, please? Okay, right at the front, second row back. Do you want to just keep your hand up? There we go. Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
So in India, generally talking about net zero, the infrastructure of any IT organization is all about glassy things, right? Which is just replicated as what is designed in the Western culture. Like we with the climatic conditions here, it makes air conditioning mandatory and all. So what is the take of all the IT organizations here to reduce such cost on sustainable things?
I think that's again a great question because context becomes important because while it may have worked in some country, may not work in India. So if you look at some of the cities, tier 2, tier 3, they're not subjected to that extreme heat. So while air conditioning is not a good thing because I went to a school where we did not have fans and we survived, it was fine. Now, 40 years later, when I go there, it's too hot. I think it's very important that in terms of the carbon sink, which we call it, if we have a carbon sink of trees being created, I think this will cool down because people think that ACs are the solution. They are not. They will do more damage. So my view is we should look at tier 3, because tier 1, you just cannot do anything about it. But I like the things around context. Just to give an example, my first job, we had this Cummins engine, which was taken from US and brought to India. And the drivers were refusing to drive the vehicles because if you look at a typical American engine, the exhaust pipe goes below the feet of the driver, which is fantastic for a cold country. But think about a hot Indian summer. So we had to redesign. That was a great learning for me that context becomes very important. While borrowing ideas is fine, but we need to look at. But I think great question, but I think ACs are not I think we have to look at cities which are cooler, and that means we need to have more of these carbon sink because 1/3 of the forests have been destroyed by mankind till date.
Okay, thank you. We'll take one final question from the front, I think. Thank you.
Hello, sir. I'm from the University of Berlin, Germany. I'm a student of AI, bachelor's. So my question here is that we want to achieve net zero carbon emissions. So, and we formulate policies regarding AI rules and so on for the government to implement. And fortunately, let's say our policies get implemented and they bear good results and so on. But in case of a change in political scenario where the new government does not favor those policies or laws and ends up disrupting the proper development and everything, so does that become a disrupt in guide that development process? So we need to start from zero when they do that. So how do we tackle those issues? Is that even a real issue? Starting?
It's definitely a real issue. Typically what happens is the moment the government changes, they will undo the things which was done by the previous government. I think this mindset has to change because what is good has to be continued. Again, a very sad example I will give you, COP28. There are, I think, 50,000 people traveled by airplanes to Dubai. Look at the carbon footprint to discuss something on environment. I think this is something we need to take serious note of. I think everybody has to come together. While policies are fine, but if we cannot solve this thing alone, the world has to come together. There's no other way. So unfortunate, but that's the sad reality.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you join me again in thanking Sandeep for an excellent talk? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, folks, we now have a coffee break in the main...
Before we break, we would like to share a small memento.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Professor Satya. I head the Energy Consortium here. It's a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much. As a token of our appreciation, we would like to share a small memento.
Thank you so much.
Okay,